Hey, with me I have Dr. Kenneth Jackson. He is the sociology chair here at Texas Southern University. How are you this morning?
I'm just fine. And yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So I just wanted to start off talking about what what made you interested in sociology and how did you make it to the place that you are now?
Um, well, I took a fairly uh, long route, I guess you might say, to kind of get to this spot. Um, I think, like most young people, when I finished high school, I was thinking about going into one of those professions where I would wind up being a very wealthy and influential individual.
Hmm.
And so I chose law as a I guess career decision. But and I came to Texas Southern as an undergraduate, and at the time they had just discontinued their pre-law program. And so we met with some of the lawyers, all of the students that were basically interested in going on to law school. Uh, we met with some of the law professors, and they suggested some potential disciplines that you could major in that would bode well for you going on to law school. And so they kind of listed a whole bunch. And one of them that they listed was sociology. Um, I had never had a course in high school uh, in sociology. Matter of fact, I was not very familiar with the discipline at all at that point in my life.
Hmm.
So I chose that one. I said,
Okay,
"Hey,
okay, okay.
this is something I don't know about. I mean, hey, let's see what that's all about, especially if it's going to serve me well." So I got into sociology, enrolled in an intro class, and never got out. I just kind of fell in love with the discipline. It resonated very well with me. Uh, it gave me an understanding of the world around me that I had been struggling to try to explain to myself prior to that point in time. Um, so I just kind of stuck with it, but I still had intentions of going to law school. Uh,
Okay.
even after that. But when I graduated, um, well, let me back it up. I met a professor, in my um, senior and junior level years here, who convinced me that the field was going a lot more quantitative than it was qualitative. So I started taking a lot of math courses and statistics courses and things of that nature,
Hmm.
and ultimately found that just as fascinating as sociology itself. So when I did graduate, um, I applied to several law schools and said I was going to actually do that, but something just kind of kept pulling me toward this field. So I took a job as a computer programmer, and wound up going back to graduate school in sociology. Got a scholarship to go uh, uh, to Chicago, and the rest was just kind of history, man. I mean,
Yes,
I
sir.
just got in and just couldn't get out, and that's kind of where I am right now. After I left Chicago, I mean, there was this kind of affinity for getting back into this kind of environment, and I managed to do that, and so here I am. So that's kind of how I got in it. I mean,
Okay,
it wasn't
okay,
a planned kind of thing; it just
okay.
kind of happened.
And during your time in sociology, have you seen what are some of the emerging trends that you've seen in recent sociological studies?
Well, I mean, uh, that is a uh, the trends kind of depend upon your interests. I mean, there are. I mean, society is constantly changing.
Okay.
Change is a is a is a characteristic feature of life.
Hmm.
So, I mean, things are going to always evolve. Uh, Now, whether we define them as evolving in a positive fashion or not, I mean, that kind of depends on our position. Uh,
Hmm.
but nonetheless, um, change is always evident.
Hmm.
So when you ask me, what kind of emerging trends, that kind of depends on what your focus is.
Okay.
And if you're thinking about uh, things such as changes in political structures or attitudes of individuals toward certain uh, types of social arrangements, or uh, if you're talking about attitudes toward education or
Hmm.
attitudes or behaviors with respect to family practices. I
Hmm.
mean, all of those things, are changing or have changed, especially if you view them in a historical context. So um, it's kind of difficult for me to kind of put my finger on one and just say, you know, this is what's going on. But if you place that within the context of my interests, um, which basically is in the area of inequality. Uh, in previous years, it was kind of called race and ethnic relations. It's called race relations in some sense. Um, Intergroup relations. All of those are names at one time or another in which this field of interest that I'm speaking of that I have here uh, have been called. Within that area, I think over time there have been quite significant uh, changes. And I don't know if you
Hmm.
could really label them as trends, but more or less changes in the nature of the relationship that exists between these groups that we call ethnic groups, racial groups, uh, economic groups, or whatever whatever you choose to kind of call them. But those kinds of trends, I mean, I don't know if maybe trend is the right word, but change is clearly a much better descriptor from my perspective on this. Those relations were one type at one period and another type at another period in contemporary society, yet another type. Um, so I would think that if I were to kind of hone in on a particular um, substantive issue here, the relationships between African Americans and whites is completely different in the 21st century. Uh, I say completely, maybe that's a kind of a misnomer. It's different
Yes,
in the
sir.
21st century than it was in the 20th century, than it was in the 19th century, and so on.
Hmm.
Those relationships are different. And what I mean by relationships, just the nature of the interactions that occur between those groups, how they manifest themselves, and how people act, believe, um, associate with one another, and so forth. All of those kind of social things, I guess, is what I'm kind of alluding to.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And you are working on a book, and I wanted us to talk a little bit about the book that you're working on and writing. Since it's Black History Month, we wanted to have this time to kind of highlight and spotlight this for the rest of the conversation. So, can you kind of give us a brief summary of what your book is talking about and what made you want to write this book?
Well, thank you for asking. Uh, but I the manuscript itself is really my attempt to address that type of trend that you just asked me about, that I was trying to explain. Um, so I attempt in this effort to focus primarily on racism,
Mm-hmm.
or what individuals normally consider racism. My basic kind of thesis here um, is that um, the concept it kind of lacks clarity. I mean, what people actually mean by this uh, seems to be doesn't it's not consistent. I guess
Mm-hmm.
that's the word I'm kind of looking for. People have different ideas about what that means. Folks seem to be able to tell you, well, I know what it looks like. I know when it happens, and I know it when I see it. But it's something, it's really one of those ideas that's rather difficult to define. And
Mm-hmm.
if you were to ask, and if you think about racism in terms of the relationships in the United States that exist between African Americans and whites, you were to ask African Americans about it. Uh, Most African Americans would generally say that, yeah, it's still going on. But you ask most whites, they would generally say, well, no, it's kind of gone away. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is it? I mean, has it gone? Is it still here? I mean, but the problem of saying that it's gone or is it here really kind of centers around what it is. I mean,
Yes, sir.
what is racism? What are we actually talking about? So the book tries to kind of address the clarity associated with that. My basic um, argument is, if we can get some clarity with respect to what it is, then we might be able to address any challenges that may stem from that, or any types of issues that may stem from the existence of that. In doing so, I argue that it's not an attitude. It's not a condition of some sorts. It's not a um, it's not a feeling,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but rather a process, and it's a process that somehow or another uses the concept of race. The and I really kind of um, operationalize that in terms of racial categorization, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
You use racial categorization to actually impact or influence the distribution of valuable resources that exist in society.
Okay.
Valuable resources such as access to education, access to knowledge, access to housing, access to healthcare, access to jobs, just that kind of stuff. So the argument is that racial categorization, or the assignment of individuals to racial groupings, makes is a more efficient way of organizing the distribution of these resources that exist within our society. So, in that sense, racism is a group phenomenon. It's about relations between groups and not really relations between individuals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a practical way of kind of thinking about that, I'm pretty sure that you have, people who were in your world when you were growing up, who were neighbors or schoolmates or whoever it is that you just didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know why you didn't like them, but you just didn't
Mm-hmm.
like them.
Yes, sir. Yes,
And
sir.
you just didn't connect in
Mm-hmm.
some kind of way. Uh, but unless you could somehow or another reduce the opportunities of that individual to do whatever that individual wanted to do, what you thought and how you felt was of very little importance.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that's the position I think I'm trying to kind of take here with respect to what happens in these individual kinds of interactions versus this group kind of interaction. Um,
Sure.
it's your ability to kind of control group behavior. So your ability to somehow or another restrict the opportunities or access or even the thinking of certain individuals in mass.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do that, then I mean that's, well, I shouldn't say if you can do that, but what I'm getting at here is that's the type of phenomenon that the book attempts to focus on, arguing that that process hasn't really changed over time. I mean, the use of race to actually do that has, you know, always been here ever since the argument goes that the first African slaves that actually entered the United States, or what was at that time the colonies, here the English colonies here in America, was in 1619. The argument that I make here is that it's been working the same since 1619 all the way up to now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, now it's kind of modified or been enhanced, or maybe enhanced is not the appropriate kind of descriptor here, but it's taken on a different view, or a different, maybe a different view is not the right. It's taken on a different state, but it's not fundamentally different, or the process is not fundamentally different from the way it's always been.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
Power has been the driving force behind that process since 1619.
Yes, sir. And so, during the previous shows in this whole series, we've been kind of focusing on leadership. And one of the things that we talked about in our previous shows on here is how all good leaders are aware of their surroundings and the root of the problem, so they can know how to lead effectively. And 2 days ago, we had a brief conversation about how Black America needed different types of leaders through those different eras. Like in 1800s, wasn't a need is a different type of leader that was needed in the 60s and the 60s to now. So how does the political climate or the state of society around can impact the ability of a leader, if that makes sense of what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think what I, the easiest way I think for me to kind of speak to that is, in the manuscript that I'm trying to um, put together here. I identify four basic periods in which the organizational context of the United States was fundamentally different.
Mhm.
Um, the first had to do with the colonial period prior to American independence. The second, with a period that I call a slavery period, which was from independence all the way up to the Civil War, where slavery was one of the primary economic activities of the United States. And then after the Civil War, where there was this kind of segregated society, where there was this separation between the newly freed slaves and the white population. And then that change that took place after the 60s, where all of those segregated barriers were actually removed. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you think about that in terms of, say, some of the leaders that we normally kind of consider, like, Frederick Douglass and Phyllis Wheatley and
Mm-hmm.
W.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson, Stokely Carmichael, Huey Newton, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Barack Obama. If you kind of think of those, and you think of these periods in which I, just kind of described, you can kind of see how within certain contexts, the strategies that those individuals, like a Frederick Douglass, the strategies that they employed were not quite the same as the strategies as a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in addition to that, the strategies that a Malcolm X and a Martin Luther King employed were not quite the same as the strategies employed by a Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so much that fundamentally the qualities of a leader were different. It
Mm-hmm.
was the environment in which they were operating that was different.
Mm-hmm.
And in each case, I think their success stemmed from a clear, concise awareness of where they were and what challenges they were actually facing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, leaders who may have that quality, but who do not completely understand the environmental context in which they're operating, then
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to be successful. For instance, if I have, maybe have someone with the qualities of a Martin Luther King who can captivate an audience with their speech and so forth. Um, Talking about we shall overcome,
Mm-hmm.
and nonviolence and things of that nature within the context of the environment in which they were in may not resonate quite well with the individuals who are dealing with this world currently.
Mm-hmm.
Something similar to what Barack Obama did, talking about, we can change, and bringing about the change and being the change and recognizing, the positive human qualities as opposed to those along racial lines, those kinds of things. That's the kind of quality I think that not excuse me, the type of understanding that the leaders have to have. So I think, it's not like you have to have different leaders in terms of the characteristics of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
but a different awareness
Yeah.
of the environment in which you are, you find yourself. And
Yeah.
even, I guess, in some sense, it's not even a difference there, because you as a leader, you still have to have that awareness, but
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that environment is not like an environment from the past. And it kind of goes back to something we just said when we began here. Everything changes, so you
Mm-hmm.
got to recognize that change, and know that what you did to address the challenge in the past may not necessarily be what needs to be done today to address the challenge. But a challenge in itself is to even understand what the challenge is. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, what do we want? I mean, what is it that we're looking for? What change are we trying to bring about? And I'm not always clear that a lot of uh, folks who are emerging today as leaders articulate that really clearly. I mean, what is it we're talking about changing? Especially if you hear someone say, "Oh, we need to, get rid of the disadvantage among the minorities of the country." Well, what does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what am I putting my finger on here? What am I actually trying to
Mhm.
change? And I think if we can get some clear insight on that, we could probably come up with some clear strategies on how to manage.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And throughout history, you kind of already talked about this a little bit, but we see how physical differences were merged together with how your status and class kind of creating kind of a social hierarchy with race. That meaning, you know, white being at the top and black being at the bottom, which makes some people believe that race is a social construct, which leads me to this type of thinking that when I was thinking about that, I just want you to chime in with your thoughts as I share you mine.
Okay.
If race is a social concept, that would mean that it could be socially deconstructed. And if that's the case, why haven't we socially disconstructed the idea of race as it relates to class? If um, if it's socially, if you do you understand what I'm
Oh,
saying?
I understand clearly. It's an
Like
excellent question.
if race is a social concept, then why haven't we take the steps to deconstruct it? And is it possible for us to? And what kind of is it the leadership that's causing the delay, or is it the people that's causing the delay? Because you see things like the book ban and the Nikki Haley saying that racist America's never been a racist country. Do you think those kind of ideologies still exist and kind of hinders that process?
Well, again, I'll go back to the manuscript that I'm trying to kind of pull together here. Um, you have to kind of look at the uh, history of the race concept itself.
Mhm.
The so you ask, if it was constructed, why can't it be deconstructed?
Mhm.
Well, you have to first answer the question: is why was it constructed in the first place?
Mhm.
So, if you can understand why it was constructed in the first place, you understand the motivation behind it. And if you
Mhm.
understand the motivation behind it, you understand why it's so difficult to deconstruct, because that motivation is still there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there is a reason, uh, or that is the position that I take, that there is a reason why this was actually done. If you go back and consider what I said a minute ago, um, uh, regarding how, excuse me, regarding those periods in which things were a bit different, and how race is simply a tool used to distribute valuable resources in society. If you think of it in that manner,
Mhm.
when the first, prior to the United States becoming a country, the United States of America, when they were still colonies,
Mhm.
possessions of Great Britain. Um, at that time, slavery was uh, uh, it was an economic institution throughout the Western Hemisphere.
Mhm.
And America was, they were kind of like the last ones to get in this hunt. I mean, things are, in the Caribbean, Brazil, uh, Central and South America. I mean, I mean, these things were, I mean, slavery had been going on for nearly 200 years before, anything even happened in 1619.
Mhm.
So when the slaves kind of came in, uh, there wasn't really much of a difference between the way in which poor whites who were brought over from England as indentured servants to help create permanent settlements here in North America. wasn't too much difference between the way in which they were treated and the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, um, uh, getting slaves became cheaper than getting indentured servants.
Mm-hmm.
So and there wasn't really, or at least there isn't that much evidence out there that would support the argument that this was all about black and white. It was more about free labor versus unfree labor.
Mm-hmm.
And but in getting that unfree labor, it became more economically advantageous to get um, uh, uh, African slaves than it
Mm-hmm.
was to get white indentured servants. So the idea began to emerge that, hey, look, we can get this labor, and in getting that kind of labor, different kinds of issues started to emerge. What do we do with uh, the white indentured servants and the relationships that exist there? Do we set the Africans free in the same sense that we set the indentured servants free, and so forth and so on? That I won't get into all the details of that, but the bottom line is, those who were in power had that ability to actually buy and sell, separate, and and institutionalize those kinds of ideas and beliefs, and to actually implement them, put them in practice, such that they became normal ways of kind of doing things. But to speak to your point about why we can't deconstruct it, it was constructed because it was a an efficient way of managing that environment. It was an efficient way of managing that plantation system, getting cheap labor, maintaining cheap labor, and everyone kind of took part in that, even those who were not directly involved with the plantation economy. I mean, there were those who were on the periphery in some sense, either by selling goods to the plantation owners, or transporting their products, or uh, providing them with banking services and hotel accommodations, and those kinds of things. I mean, everybody was involved in some way or another. Um, so it spoke to that was the nature of the operation. As things changed, if you move beyond that, and let's just jump real quick to the Civil War. You had the slavery system where, I mean, I think you can kind of see, as I'm kind of explaining it here, how it worked to everybody's advantage to have slaves. Everybody's advantage except the slaves, but it worked to those who were in power to have that type of system. You move to the slavery period, when slavery is no longer acceptable. It's abolished. It's out. That means the way of life of a certain group of people has now just totally been disrupted. And so, that segregation period turned out to be, from the point of view that I have here, it turned out to be an effort to protect those interests that had existed for nearly 200 years during that slavery period and the colonial period. So it's kind of like, you got 3 or 4 generations of people who were kind of uh, living, thinking of themselves as being superior, and all this other kind of stuff, having opportunities and privileges that everybody else didn't have, and then bam, here comes the Civil War, and now I got to share all this. So there's a pushback. So there's a matter of protecting that interest. So
Yes.
how do you do that? So now you got segregation. So you kind of move, and bam, we take segregation away, in the 1960s, and here we are. Uh, we got, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, I'm being invaded by people in my space, and so what I think we have now with those examples that you just kind of gave with respect to the political climate, you have individuals trying to protect their interests. I mean, it just so happens that the protection of that interest tracks along those racial lines. It's always tracked along those racial lines, and it's still tracking along those racial lines. But it's not about, and that's why you don't see them going and saying, "Hey, the white people need to do this or the white people need to do
And
that." Yeah, they're saying this is the American way. This is what we do. But for black people, it's like that's the white way. And so um, I think it's more about protecting the interests, and that's why you're finding individuals who, I mean, it's difficult to kind of deconstruct this idea of race. All of the other European Americans are clustered uh, at a different level. Then yeah, their interests are going to be basically different, and I
mm,
think that's kind of where we are, and kind of speaks to that difference. So the only way we're going to kind of get around that or deconstruct that is to make it such that race is no longer useful as a means of distributing those resources.
mhm.
How do you do that? I'm not here to kind of you know kind of give you some strategies that's going to kind of work. But
Yes, sir.
I think it's just a matter of figuring out where it is we're trying to go. Race has got this, in some sense, become no longer relevant uh, as a means of of providing advantages to one group versus another. And once that happens, then yeah, I mean, no one will really care. I mean, the only reason people care now is because there are advantages associated with it.
Sir.
The only reason that African Americans are pushing back is because there's a disadvantage here. The only reason whites are protecting it because there is an advantage.
Mhm,
So once you get rid of disadvantage advantage, uh, that goes away.
mhm,
But um, how do you do that? That's the question for the leader.
mhm. Yes, yes. And it kind of goes along with a little bit, I guess, with kind of cultural exchange and understanding. You know, um, about people from different backgrounds and lifestyles coming together to share their experience, values, and traditions. Because this is just my opinion. We all have different opinions, but and I think um, going to what you was talking about is if we just realize that, hey, we are all human beings. You know what I'm saying? There's a saying that our skin may, my skin may be brown, yours may be white or whatever the case may be. But if you cut us open, we all gonna bleed out red blood. That's a saying I've been hearing a long time. And I think opening up and learning from one another and finding common grounds, coming together to find more things that are in us that are alike than different. To me, I think that can be a an avenue to take, or the exchange, the have this culture kind of exchange and understanding. Because I think most of it is lack of empathy between each other, because I haven't experienced it. It must not be real because I never experienced it. Or, you know what I'm saying? We try to base this whole concept over our personal experience, our beliefs, instead of kind of trying to reaching out and kind of understanding, that hey, there is an advantage being this way, or there is a disadvantage being this way. You can even take that down to kind of inter I know I'm talking about a lot of things. This was
No,
just
that's fine. I mean, I
while you
understand. I'm
talk.
following. I'm following you.
And you had a lot that goes back to intersectionality, how all of it work together. Because even a black man has an advantage, some advantages that a black woman doesn't have because he's a man. He's a male. There's other aspects that I was thinking while you was talking that we see that in a lot of different places, not just in race, but you see that in a lot of, you know, different areas of life. And while you I know I keep rambling off the map. I'm trying to get to my point. But and I think that leads to these, these stereotypes, so say, and these notions that we have of one another because we have such a closed mindness to to other groups and other minorities or whatever the case may be. And I guess my question or thing that I'm trying to get at is how much do you think that other social factors affects the effects of racism? How you think all those other those other little things kind of affects the grand mass on a um macro level, on a macro level.
Well, let me kind of start with the first part, and I assume that when you say other social factors, you're probably talking about other common interests, such as living in the same neighborhood or going to the
Hmm.
same school or
Yeah.
being male, and or
Hmm.
being female, and things of that nature. I'm assuming that's what you mean, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me kind of get to the first part that you were talking about, that we probably need to have that kind of cultural exchange, and just the empathy, I think, for what other individuals are going through and so forth. Well, I'm not saying that is not a legitimate strategy, but if I had to place that in a bucket, I would call that a strategy to educate people,
Mhm.
to kind of make everyone somehow or another aware of other people's kind of situation, and as a result, their attitudes would somehow or another change, and their behaviors would follow suit. Um, I my initial reaction to that, and it's consistent with other scholars out here who have kind of looked at this issue, is that racism itself, excuse me, the attitudes that we're talking about, that you're this lack of empathy, or this disdain for another group and so forth, those attitudes actually stem from the structure of society rather than the other way around. In other
Mhm.
words, those relationships that actually exist create those, uh, or I shouldn't say create, but attitudes and behaviors stem from those relationships,
Mhm.
rather than those attitudes creating those relationships. So I'm not certain that a cultural exchange is going to really get at the root of the problem.
Mhm.
The root of the problem is exists within those relationships, um, um, in regards to who gets what, when, and how.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, it's like, if you remain poor, and all of your children remain poor, no matter how much empathy I have for you, your situation and your life chances are no different. And I still think of you as someone beneath me. It is only in a context where I have where one group has the same opportunities as another group,
Mhm.
that those attitudes and behaviors will change.
Mhm.
And changing those things is a function of power. It is a function of who controls those those levers, those levers that can dictate what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And those things, I think, are generally what we call laws. Those are the laws of our society. The laws of our society tell us what we can and what we cannot do. They circumscribe opportunities for us. For instance, let's take education. Let's take the valuable resource of knowledge. Uh, for nearly 300 and some years in this country, African Americans were restricted in terms of the type of knowledge that they could obtain.
Mm-hmm.
Restricted through what was, most people know as segregated education.
Mm-hmm.
There was white education and there was black education. Now there was some, individuals who crossed those lines, who, always were, some African Americans who actually went to predominantly white or European American schools. You know, that was the case, but in a very general sense, that education was always separated. Now we move after the 1960s, when it was actually the '54 Brown decision. You kind of broke down those barriers, and now our public schools have just gone to pot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're nowhere. They're nowhere near the efficient knowledge disseminating environments that they were prior to uh, the 19 the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's particularly true, and I should say, I shouldn't say all of them, but it's particularly true in inner cities where most African Americans are found.
Mm-hmm.
Suburban schools, they work just fine. Most rural public schools, they work just fine.
Mm-hmm.
But inner city schools, where there's a predominant number of African Americans, experience those those types of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So the point I guess I'm getting to here is that it's more about changing the nature of those structural relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that without tearing down the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how some people argue that, racism is embedded within the structure of our society. So we just need to tear the whole thing down. I mean, yeah. I mean, that is one strategy. It's not, doesn't seem like a very efficient one to me, but I mean, it is one strategy. But I think that, if you understand how power is distributed, then you just simply take part in that process.
Yes.
The simplest way that I can kind of point that, I mean, the simplest strategy that I can point to with respect to that is voting. The people who are in office who make those laws got voted in, plain and simple. So if you don't vote, are always talking about the system is rigged. Yeah, I guess so. If you don't vote,
Yes,
I
sir.
mean, if you don't vote, the people get in and they make the laws, and then you say, well, it doesn't matter if I vote for this guy or that guy. Then probably you haven't been paying close attention. Because I mean, you may not like what either one of them did, but they did different things.
Mm-hmm.
And you as an individual person having an opportunity to actually address that at different levels if you trying to understand. But if you can change that, you change the laws. You change the laws, you change the opportunities. You change the opportunities, you change the structure. You change the structure, attitudes and behaviors change.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And as we wrapping up, I would just like to thank you for taking out this time to be on here with me today. And everybody who's going to watch, thank you all for watching and tuning in. This is going to be shown at the end of the month, so it's going to be the last day of Black History. So I hope that I want as we end it off, can you share us like a little Black history fact that you know of off the off the head or something? It can
Well,
be something about the school.
I like that. I really appreciate you even taking the time to sit down and talk to me, thinking that I had something to offer. And I hope that I have shared a little bit, at least, of just my thoughts about things. That kind of ramble on about a lot of different kinds of things. But the point I think I really want to emphasize here is that simply by getting involved, you help bring about change because you're trying to increase your own understanding of the world around you. And that's perhaps the most important thing of all. I mean, I think the mere fact that you would sit and watch something like this says to me that, oh, something just doesn't seem right here. And I can't put my finger on what it is, but let me just try to soak up this knowledge and get to a point where uh, things begin to make a bit more sense, and I can somehow or another plan a better strategy for how I plan to move forward with my own life in terms of what I'm doing. But in terms of a little, you know, historical fact, I can't really put my hands on anything that would kind of stand out over and above what you normally hear during this time of the year.
Mhm.
Folks are always coming through with, did you know that so and so did this, or so and so did that, or so and so did. I mean, that's what humankind does. So I mean, just I mean the idea that you have to say this is an indication of the challenge that you're trying to address,
Mhm.
because somewhere down the line you have been told that you're somehow another less than what everybody else happens to be, when all around you see people who are doing just the opposite of what people told
Mhm.
you folks couldn't do.
Mhm.
Uh, I'll share this fact. I mean, it's historical, but I should say it's more biographical than anything else. When I grew up in an all black environment.
Mhm.
Um, Everything I needed, everything I wanted, everything that was important to me, my family, and everybody else was provided by people who looked like me.
Mhm.
I never thought of folks as being different. I mean, we interacted with European Americans. I mean, they were kind of all around us, but they were just other people in our lives who provided something that we basically need. We never thought of them as being more, less, or anything else.
Mhm.
Uh, we were just kind of living. So, as a black historical fact, uh, I think what we're looking for is just to get back to a normal life where we can just be human beings.
Mhm.
As opposed to black human beings or African American human beings or white human beings or European human beings, just people who are kind of here on this rock someplace out here. Uh,
Yes,
you
sir.
know, trying to live. And that's kind of where I am. And
Mhm.
I think we make history every day. We should be kind of talking about what we do every day, not just in February.
Mhm.